The screams echoed through the sterile hospital corridor like a banshee's wail, piercing through the usual symphony of beeping monitors and hushed conversations. Destiny Washington pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the elevator, her 13-year-old frame trembling as Karen Mitchell's security baton connected with her shoulder for the third time. The impact sent shockwaves through her body, but it was the woman's words that cut deeper than any physical blow. "Stop moving, you fat little troublemaker," Karen snarled, her face twisted with a hatred that seemed to consume the small elevator space. "Girls like you don't belong in decent places like this." The red light of the security camera blinked steadily in the corner, capturing every moment of the assault that would soon become the catalyst for change that no one could have anticipated. Destiny's dark eyes, wide with terror and confusion, reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting as she tried to understand why visiting her newborn baby brother had turned into this nightmare. Just 40 minutes earlier, Destiny had been walking through the maternity ward with the careful steps of someone carrying precious cargo. In her hands, she held a small teddy bear with a blue ribbon around its neck, a gift she had saved 3 months of allowance to buy for baby Marcus. Her mother, Shanice, had given birth 2 days ago, and today was the first day Destiny could visit due to the hospital's COVID protocols. The Riverside General Hospital buzzed with its usual afternoon activity. Nurses in scrubs moved efficiently through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and hope in equal measure. Destiny had navigated these halls with growing excitement, her heart full of anticipation at meeting her baby brother. At 13, she understood the significance of this moment. She was no longer the baby of the family, and the responsibility of being a big sister filled her with pride. Her reflection in the elevator's polished walls showed a young girl who carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the challenges she faced daily. Destiny was what adults euphemistically called heavyset, a fact that had made her the target of cruel comments at school and suspicious glances from strangers. But her grandmother, Rosa Washington, had always told her that her worth wasn't measured by a number on a scale or the narrow-minded opinions of others. "You hold your head high, baby girl," Rosa would say, her weathered hands gentle on Destiny's shoulders. "Your value comes from your heart, your mind, and the love you give to this world. Don't let anybody tell you different." Rosa Washington was more than just a grandmother to Destiny. She was a living legend. In the 1960s, Rosa had marched alongside Dr. King, had been arrested 17 times for peaceful protests, and had dedicated her life to fighting for civil rights. Her photograph hung in the Smithsonian, and her autobiography, Rising from the Ashes of Injustice, had won numerous awards. But to Destiny, she was simply Grandma Rosa, the woman who made the best cornbread in Birmingham and told stories that could make you laugh and cry in the same breath. The elevator had been crowded when Destiny first entered on the ground floor. A young couple with flowers, an elderly man with a walker, and 2 nurses discussing shift changes had filled the small space with comfortable chatter. Destiny had positioned herself in the back corner, holding her teddy bear carefully to avoid bumping into anyone. She had learned to make herself small in crowded spaces, a survival mechanism developed through years of feeling people's judgmental stares. Karen Mitchell had entered on the second floor, her security uniform crisp and her badge gleaming under the elevator lights. She was a woman in her late 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog every person she encountered, sorting them into categories of acceptable and problematic. When her gaze fell on Destiny, something dark flickered across her features. "Excuse me, young lady," Karen had said, her voice carrying an authority that demanded attention. "Are you here with an adult?" Destiny had looked up, confused by the question. "Yes, ma'am. I'm visiting my baby brother. My mom just had him 2 days ago." The other passengers had continued their conversations, unaware of the tension building in their small shared space. Karen's eyes had narrowed as she studied Destiny more closely, taking in her size, her dark skin, her carefully maintained but clearly secondhand clothes. "Which room?" Karen had pressed, stepping closer. "Room 412. Shanice Washington is my mother." Destiny had answered politely, the way her grandmother had taught her to always respond to adults, even when their questions made her uncomfortable. The elevator had reached the 4th floor, and the other passengers had filed out, leaving Destiny alone with Karen. The security officer had immediately pressed the emergency stop button, and the elevator lurched to a halt between floors. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the mechanical hum of the building systems. "Now listen here, girl," Karen had said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I know your type. You think you can just waddle around this hospital causing problems, taking up space, making decent people uncomfortable." Destiny had felt her heart begin to race, confusion mixing with a growing fear. "I don't understand. I'm just visiting my brother." "Don't play dumb with me," Karen had snapped, pulling out her security baton. "I've been watching you since you got on this elevator. The way you're taking up space, breathing heavy, probably spreading germs everywhere. We don't need your kind disturbing the other patients." The first blow had come without warning, the baton striking Destiny's upper arm with a force that made her cry out. The teddy bear had fallen from her hands, landing on the elevator floor between them like a silent witness to the horror unfolding. "Please stop," Destiny had pleaded, but her words only seemed to enrage Karen further. "Big girls like you need to learn discipline," Karen had hissed, raising the baton again. "Maybe if someone had taught you some self-control earlier, you wouldn't be such a burden on society. I should call child services right now. Report your parents for neglect. Look at the state of you." The second blow had caught Destiny across the shoulder, and the third had grazed her face, leaving a red mark that would later become crucial evidence. Through her tears and terror, Destiny had noticed the blinking red light of the security camera, silently recording every moment of her assault. What Karen Mitchell didn't know, couldn't have known as she continued her brutal attack, was that Rosa Washington was at that very moment walking through the hospital's main entrance. She had driven 3 hours from Birmingham to meet her newest great-grandchild, her car loaded with handmade blankets and her famous peach cobbler. At 78 years old, Rosa still moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent decades fighting battles and refusing to back down. Rosa's intuition, honed by years of activism and motherhood, told her something was wrong the moment she stepped into the hospital lobby. The usual bustling energy felt different, charged with an undercurrent of distress that she couldn't quite identify. She had planned to stop by the gift shop first, but instead found herself heading directly to the elevators. Meanwhile, on the 4th floor, Shanice Washington was growing concerned. Destiny should have arrived 30 minutes ago, and it wasn't like her daughter to be late, especially for something as important as meeting her baby brother. Shanice's maternal instincts were in overdrive, amplified by the hormonal changes of recent childbirth and the protective, fierce love she felt for both her children. Has anyone seen a young girl, about 13, maybe looking for room 412? Shanice asked the nurses at the station. Baby Marcus sleeping peacefully in her arms. Nurse Patricia Chen, a kind woman who had been working the maternity ward for 15 years, looked up from her charts with concern. "I haven't seen anyone fitting that description. Honey, are you expecting someone?" "My daughter Destiny. She was supposed to be here by now to meet her baby brother." Shanice's voice carried the edge of worry that every mother recognizes. It was then that the emergency alarm began to sound from the elevator shaft. The mechanical wailing filled the corridor, and Patricia immediately reached for her radio. "Security to elevator bank 4. "We have an emergency stop situation," she announced, her professional calm masking the growing concern in her voice. Back in the elevator, Destiny's world had narrowed to the small metal box that had become her prison. Karen had grown more aggressive with each passing minute, her hatred seeming to feed on itself like a destructive wildfire. The security officer's face was flushed with exertion and malice as she continued her assault, both physical and verbal. "You think you can just take up space in this world without consequences?" Karen panted, raising her baton again. "Girls like you are what's wrong with society. Lazy, taking resources from people who deserve them, probably on welfare, eating up tax dollars." Each word was punctuated by another blow, and Destiny felt something break inside her that had nothing to do with physical pain. This was the moment when innocence dies. When a child realizes that the world contains people who will hate you for existing, for taking up space, for having the audacity to be different from their narrow definition of acceptable. But Destiny Washington was Rosa Washington's granddaughter, and the strength that had sustained 3 generations of women through slavery, Jim Crow, and countless battles for dignity ran through her veins like liquid steel, even as tears streamed down her face, even as her body trembled with pain and fear. Something deep inside her refused to break completely. "My grandmother," Destiny whispered through her tears. "My grandmother is Rosa Washington." Karen paused mid-swing, confusion flickering across her face. "What did you say?" "Rosa Washington. She's my grandmother. She marched with Dr. King. She's written books about civil rights." Destiny's voice was stronger now, drawing from a well of pride and history that no amount of brutality could destroy. For a moment, uncertainty crossed Karen's features. Even someone as consumed by hatred as she was knew the name Rosa Washington. The civil rights icon's face had been on magazine covers, her quotes shared on social media, her story taught in schools across the nation. But then Karen's face hardened again, her prejudice overriding any momentary doubt. "You're lying," she snarled. "A girl like you, related to someone important. That's the biggest joke I've heard all day." The elevator shuddered as the emergency override system began to engage, responding to the alarm that had been triggered by the extended stop. Rosa Washington was now on the 4th floor, having taken the stairs when she heard about the elevator emergency. Her 78-year-old legs moved with surprising speed, driven by a grandmother's intuition that her grandchild was in danger. "What's happening with the elevator?" Rosa asked Patricia Chen, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. Patricia looked up, immediately recognizing the woman standing before her. Rosa Washington's face was known to anyone who had studied American history in the past 60 years. "Mrs. Washington, we have an emergency stop situation. Maintenance is working on it now. My granddaughter was supposed to meet me here. She should have arrived by now." Rosa's maternal radar was pinging with increasing urgency. Shanice appeared at Rosa's side, baby Marcus still in her arms. "Mama Rosa, Destiny hasn't shown up yet. I'm getting worried." The 3 women looked at each other, and a terrible understanding passed between them. Rosa's eyes hardened with a fire that had burned since she was a teenager, facing down police dogs and fire hoses in Selma. "Get that elevator open. Now!" Rosa's voice carried the weight of decades of fighting for justice, and Patricia immediately called for the maintenance chief. Inside the elevator, Karen had resumed her assault, but something in her demeanor had changed. Whether it was Destiny's mention of her grandmother or the growing sounds of activity outside the elevator, a new desperation had entered her actions. She seemed to realize that time was running out, and her attacks became more frenzied. "Shut up about your grandmother," Karen screamed, the baton coming down again and again. "Nobody cares about your lies. You're nothing but a fat little liar who doesn't deserve to be in the same building as decent people." But Destiny had found her voice now, drawing strength from the generations of strong women who had come before her. "Rosa Washington is my grandmother, and she taught me that I have value. She taught me that people like you have always existed, and people like us have always survived you." The elevator doors began to part with a mechanical grinding sound that seemed to echo through the entire hospital. The maintenance chief, a burly man named Tom Rodriguez, had managed to engage the manual override, and the doors were slowly separating to reveal the horror within. Rosa Washington was the first person Karen Mitchell saw when the doors opened, and the security officer's face went white with shock. There was no mistaking who stood before her. The same strong features that had graced magazine covers and history books. The same proud bearing that had faced down segregationists and hate groups for 6 decades. "Dear Lord," Rosa whispered, taking in the scene before her. Her granddaughter was pressed against the elevator wall, tears streaming down her face, angry red marks visible on her arms and shoulders. The security officer stood over her with a baton raised, frozen in mid-swing, like a statue of hatred caught in amber. "Step away from my granddaughter." Rosa's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried the force of decades of moral authority. "Step away from her right now." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The baton trembled in her hand as the full weight of what she had done began to crash down on her. She had just spent the last 20 minutes assaulting the granddaughter of one of America's most respected civil rights leaders, and every moment had been captured on security camera. I didn't. She was causing problems," Karen stammered, but the words died in her throat as she met Rosa's gaze. "Destiny, baby, come to Grandma." Rosa held out her arms, and Destiny stumbled forward, collapsing into the embrace that had comforted her through scraped knees and hurt feelings for 13 years. But this was different. This was trauma that would require more than hugs and homemade cookies to heal. Shanice pushed past the crowd that had gathered, baby Marcus crying in response to the tension in the air. "What happened to my daughter? What did you do to my baby?" The corridor had filled with hospital staff, security personnel, and concerned visitors. Patricia Chen was already on her radio, calling for additional security and requesting that the police be notified. Tom Rodriguez was examining the elevator's emergency stop mechanism, documenting everything for what would undoubtedly become an investigation. Dr. Jennifer Barnes, the hospital's chief administrator, arrived within minutes, her professional composure barely masking her horror at what she was witnessing. She had worked at Riverside General for 12 years and had never encountered anything like this. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation," Dr. Barnes announced, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "Security, please escort her to the administrative office and ensure she doesn't leave the building until the police arrive." Karen seemed to finally understand the magnitude of her situation. "Wait, you don't understand?" She was being disruptive, taking up space. "I was just trying to maintain order." Maintain order. Rosa's voice cut through Karen's excuses like a sword through paper. By beating a 13-year-old child, by trapping her in an elevator and terrorizing her, is that your idea of order? The crowd that had gathered fell silent, watching as one of America's most respected civil rights activists confronted the woman who had just assaulted her granddaughter. It was a moment that would be talked about for years to come, analyzed in news articles and academic papers. But for Rosa, it was simply a grandmother protecting her family. "I've spent 60 years fighting people like you," Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "People who think they can determine who deserves dignity, who belongs in public spaces, Who has the right to exist without fear? You're not maintaining order. You're perpetuating the same hatred that I've been fighting my entire life. Officer Michael Thompson arrived with his partner, Officer Sarah Liu, both responding to what had been called in as an assault on a minor. Thompson was a 20-year veteran of the force who had investigated countless cases. But the scene that greeted him was unprecedented. A security officer being restrained by hospital personnel, a traumatized teenager being comforted by her family, and Rosa Washington herself standing in the middle of it all. Mrs. Washington, Officer Thompson said respectfully, "Can you tell us what happened here?" Rosa's account was measured and precise, the result of decades of experience dealing with law enforcement in various capacities. She described arriving at the hospital to find her granddaughter trapped in an elevator with a security officer who had been beating her. The evidence of the assault visible on Destiny's body. The clear documentation on the security cameras. Dr. Barnes immediately offered to have Destiny examined by medical staff and to provide copies of the security footage. This is completely unacceptable behavior from someone employed by this hospital. We will cooperate fully with your investigation. As the police officers interviewed witnesses and began their investigation, word of the incident began to spread beyond the hospital walls. In the age of social media, news traveled fast, and within hours, Justice for Destiny was trending on Twitter. The story had all the elements that captured public attention: a civil rights icon's granddaughter, an unprovoked assault, clear video evidence, and the broader issues of discrimination and abuse of power. But for Rosa Washington, the social media storm was secondary to the more immediate concern of caring for her traumatized granddaughter. Destiny had been examined by Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatrician who documented multiple contusions and bruises consistent with being struck repeatedly with a blunt object. The physical injuries would heal, but the emotional trauma would require careful attention. "Grandma," Destiny whispered as they sat in the family waiting room. "She said I didn't belong here. She said I was taking up too much space." Rosa held her granddaughter close, feeling the familiar rage that had fueled her activism for 6 decades. "Baby girl, that woman was wrong about everything. You belong everywhere you choose to be. You take up exactly the amount of space you're supposed to take up, and don't let anybody tell you different." But she was so angry. "Grandma, so mean. Why did she hate me so much when she didn't even know me?" It was the question that had no easy answer. The question that Rosa had been trying to answer her entire life. Some people carry hate in their hearts like a poison. Sweetheart, it makes them sick inside, and they try to spread that sickness to others. But you can't let their poison become yours. You fight back with love, with dignity, with strength. News vans began arriving at Riverside General Hospital within hours of the first social media posts. Reporters who had covered Rosa Washington's activism for decades recognized the significance of this story. It wasn't just about one incident, but about the ongoing struggle for dignity and equality that Rosa had embodied for 60 years. Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News was among the first to arrive. Having covered civil rights issues for the past 15 years, she understood that this story required careful, respectful reporting that honored both the severity of the assault and the broader implications for society. Rosa made the decision to hold a press conference that evening, despite her family's concerns about Destiny's emotional state. "This isn't just about what happened to Destiny," she explained to Shanice. "This is about every child who's been made to feel less than, every person who's been told they don't belong. We don't fight back by hiding." The press conference was held in the hospital's main lobby, transformed into an impromptu venue for what would become one of the most watched news events of the year. Rosa stood at a makeshift podium, Destiny beside her, Shanice holding baby Marcus. 3 generations of Washington women, representing the ongoing struggle for justice and dignity. "My name is Rosa Washington," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had addressed crowds for 6 decades. 60 years ago, I was a young woman who believed that if we fought hard enough, if we were brave enough, if we were willing to sacrifice enough, we could build a world where children like my granddaughter could grow up without fear, without hatred, without violence. The cameras captured every word, every gesture, broadcasting the scene to millions of viewers across the nation. Today, my 13-year-old granddaughter was beaten by a security officer in this hospital simply because she exists, because she takes up space in this world, because someone decided she didn't belong. Rosa's voice grew stronger as she continued. "But let me tell you something about my granddaughter. She belongs everywhere. She belongs in this hospital visiting her baby brother. She belongs in schools and parks and stores and anywhere else she chooses to go. She belongs in this world, taking up space, breathing air, living her life with dignity and respect." Destiny stepped forward, her young voice trembling but determined. "That lady tried to make me feel small and worthless. But my grandma taught me that I'm not small. I'm not worthless. I'm Destiny Washington, and I belong here." The press conference was carried live on national television, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with messages of support for Destiny and calls for justice. "Destiny belongs" joined "Your Justice for Destiny" as trending hashtags, and donations began pouring in for legal fees and therapy for the traumatized teenager. Karen Mitchell watched the press conference from the holding cell where she had been placed after being charged with assault, battery, false imprisonment, and hate crimes. The woman who had been so confident in her hatred just hours earlier now faced the reality of what her actions had cost her. She had lost her job, faced serious criminal charges, and had become the face of institutional racism and discrimination. Her lawyer, a public defender named James Harrison, had the unenviable task of defending someone whose actions had been captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people. "Karen, I have to be honest with you," he said during their first meeting. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. The security footage is clear. The witnesses are credible. And the victim is the granddaughter of one of the most respected civil rights leaders in the country." "I was just doing my job," Karen insisted, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. She was being disruptive. Karen, she's 13 years old, and she was visiting her newborn brother. How exactly was she being disruptive? Harrison had reviewed the security footage multiple times, and there was no question about what had occurred. The trial that followed became a national sensation, covered by major news networks and closely watched by civil rights organizations across the country. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michelle Foster, had an overwhelming amount of evidence. But the case represented something larger than just the assault of one teenager. "This case is about more than the actions of one security officer," Foster said in her opening statement. "It's about the systematic dehumanization of people who don't fit narrow definitions of acceptable. It's about the assumption that some people deserve less dignity, less respect, less protection under the law." The security footage was played for the jury, and the courtroom fell silent as they watched 20 minutes of unprovoked brutality. Several jurors were visibly shaken, and one had to excuse herself briefly during the most violent portions of the video. Destiny testified on the third day of the trial, her voice steady as she recounted the assault. "She said I didn't belong there because of how I look. She said I was taking up too much space. She hit me with her stick over and over, and she wouldn't let me leave." The defense's attempt to portray Karen as someone who had simply made a mistake in judgment fell apart under the weight of evidence and testimony. Hospital employees testified about Karen's history of complaints against minority patients, and former colleagues described a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been overlooked for years. Rosa Washington's testimony was the emotional climax of the trial. "I've spent 60 years fighting for the right of people like my granddaughter to exist in this world without fear," she told the jury. "What happened to Destiny is exactly what I've been fighting against my entire life. The belief that some people matter less than others." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. Karen Mitchell was sentenced to 5 years in prison for the assault, with additional time for the hate crime enhancements. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, spoke directly to the defendant during sentencing. "Ms. Mitchell, your actions that day were not just criminal. They were a rejection of the basic human dignity that our society is supposed to protect. You used your position of authority to terrorize a child, and in doing so, you violated not just the law, but the fundamental principles of decency and respect that hold our community together." But the story didn't end with Karen's conviction. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about discrimination, body shaming, and the treatment of children in public spaces. Riverside General Hospital implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees and established the Rosa Washington Center for Dignity and Respect, dedicated to ensuring that all patients and visitors are treated with equality. Destiny School District used the incident as an opportunity to launch an anti-bullying campaign focused on body positivity and acceptance. Students across the district participated in HOA Destiny Belongs assemblies, sharing their own stories of discrimination and commitment to creating more inclusive environments. The teddy bear that Destiny had dropped during the assault became a symbol of resilience and hope. She gave it to baby Marcus, and it became known as Courage Bear, representing the strength to stand up against hatred and injustice. Toy companies began producing replicas, with proceeds going to anti-bullying organizations and civil rights groups. 6 months after the assault, Destiny stood once again in Riverside General Hospital, but this time, the circumstances were entirely different. She was there for the dedication of the Rosa Washington Center, surrounded by hospital staff, community leaders, and fellow students who had become part of her support network. "When I was in that elevator," Destiny said to the crowd gathered for the dedication, "I thought about giving up. I thought about believing what that lady said about me. But then I remembered my grandma's words about belonging, about taking up space, about fighting back with love and dignity." Rosa watched her granddaughter speak with pride that went beyond words. The 13-year-old who had been traumatized in an elevator had found her voice, had become an advocate for other children facing discrimination and bullying. The cycle of activism that had defined the Washington family for generations was continuing in a new voice, for a new era, or "My granddaughter taught me something that day," Rosa said as she addressed the crowd. "She taught me that the fight for dignity and respect isn't something we pass down from one generation to the next. It's something we share, something we do together, something that makes us all stronger." The Rosa Washington Center became a model for hospitals across the country, implementing programs to address unconscious bias, cultural competency, and patient advocacy. Medical schools began requiring courses on dignity and respect, using Destiny's story as a case study in the importance of treating all patients as full human beings deserving of care and compassion. Karen Mitchell served her full sentence, and upon her release, she participated in restorative justice programs designed to help offenders understand the impact of their actions. She never fully recanted her views, but she did acknowledge the harm she had caused and participated in educational programs about bias and discrimination. 3 years after the incident, Destiny Washington received a full scholarship to attend Rosa Parks Academy, a prestigious preparatory school dedicated to social justice and civil rights. At 16, She had become a sought-after speaker at conferences and symposiums, sharing her story and advocating for children who face discrimination. "People ask me if I'm angry about what happened to me," Destiny said during her graduation speech at middle school. "The truth is, I was angry. I was scared. I felt small and worthless. But my grandma taught me that anger can be fuel for change. Fear can be transformed into courage. And feeling small can motivate you to take up exactly the space you deserve." The elevator at Riverside General Hospital was renovated and renamed the Dignity Express, with a plaque commemorating the events that had taken place there and the changes they had inspired. But for most visitors, it was simply an elevator, a normal part of a hospital where people came to be born, to heal, to say goodbye, and to begin again. Rosa Washington continued her activism well into her 80s, but her focus shifted to mentoring young advocates like her granddaughter. She had lived to see another generation take up the fight for justice, and she knew that the work would continue long after she was gone. "Every generation has to fight the same battles in new ways," she told Destiny during one of their regular walks through the park, where they had spent so many hours together. "The faces of hatred change. The methods of discrimination evolve. But the core fight remains the same. The fight for human dignity. For the right to exist and thrive and take up space in this world." On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Destiny Washington stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council, addressing delegates from around the world about dignity, discrimination, and the rights of children. At 18, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had learned early that adversity could be transformed into advocacy, that trauma could become a source of strength. "5 years ago, a woman tried to make me believe that I didn't belong in this world," she told the international audience. "Today, I stand before you representing not just my own story, but the stories of countless children who have been told they are too much, too different, too other to deserve dignity and respect." The elevator incident had become more than just one moment of violence. It had become a catalyst for change, a turning point in conversations about bias, discrimination, and the treatment of children in public spaces. Laws were passed requiring bias training for security personnel. Hospitals implemented patient advocate programs, and schools across the nation adopted anti-bullying curricula based on the principles Rosa Washington had lived by for 8 decades. But perhaps the most important change was the one that occurred in the heart of a 13-year-old girl who learned that she could transform her worst moment into her greatest strength. Destiny Washington carried her grandmother's legacy forward, not just as an inherited responsibility, but as a chosen mission to ensure that no child would ever again be made to feel that they didn't belong in this world. The teddy bear with the blue ribbon still sat on baby Marcus's dresser, a reminder of the day that had changed everything. But it no longer represented trauma and fear. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the power of speaking truth to power, of the endless capacity of the human spirit to transform pain into purpose. And in hospitals and schools and public spaces across the nation, children grew up in a world that was just a little bit more aware, a little bit more careful, a little bit more committed to the radical idea that every person, regardless of size, color, ability, or any other characteristic, deserves to take up space in this world with dignity, respect, and the absolute certainty that they belong. The screams in that elevator had echoed far beyond the metal walls where they began, transforming into a chorus of voices demanding justice, dignity, and the fundamental right of every child to exist in this world without fear. And, in that transformation, Karen Mitchell's attempt to diminish one young girl had instead amplified the voices of thousands, creating a legacy of change that would endure long after the elevator doors had closed for the final time.